There are tests in life that come without invitation and never need a score. No bright stage, no public judges, just a moment when your heart speaks for itself. In a small coastal town, as the mayor's seat was about to be passed on to a new generation, a poor baker girl, who never once thought she could be chosen, stepped into a journey that would change her life forever. Not through titles, not through wealth, but through a loaf of bread and a quiet act of kindness no one ever saw. This is the story of Lena, the girl with flour-covered hands, but a heart that shone brighter than any crown. In a small coastal town, where the salty winds swept over every gray-tiled rooftop and the church bells rang each morning like a gentle call to peace, a strange piece of news began to stir whispers among the townspeople. The current mayor, a frail old man who had dedicated decades of his life to keeping this town safe and quiet, had fallen seriously ill. He had no children, no relatives to carry on his legacy. But what shocked the townsfolk even more was that he hadn't chosen his successor from the ranks of the local government, nor had he summoned any of the wealthy or powerful elites from the big city. Instead, he quietly left behind a handwritten letter, delivered to every home, every shop, every narrow alleyway of the town, from the dusty old bus stop to the little cafe by the bay. In that letter, the mayor wrote, "I wish to find a young person, preferably a woman, not for her degrees or wealth, but for one thing only, a heart that truly loves people and a soul willing to serve others without expecting thanks." The next mayor would not be chosen through debates or by submitting detailed development plans. There would be no official elimination rounds. Instead, it would all begin with a secret test, one no one knew the nature of and no one knew when it would come. The news spread like the wind. Some scoffed, saying, "Absurd. No skill tests. No intellect. How do you pick a leader like that?" But others grew quiet, gazing into the distance with a soft flicker of hope in their eyes. The town had never seen anything so strange before. A position of power to be given not through competition, but through an invisible test, which, as the mayor wrote, can only be passed if your heart is truly pure. And then, from a quiet corner of the town, from the tiny bakery at the end of Cobblestone Street, Lena, a young baker girl, was still completely unaware that her life was about to step into a journey no one could have predicted. Not far from the center of town, nestled quietly between two weathered walls, stood a tiny bakery called Lena's Oven. The wooden sign above the door had faded with the years, sometimes swaying in the ocean breeze. But inside, it was always warm, filled with the scent of dough, butter, and something sweetly comforting. The shop belonged to Lena, a young woman just 26 years old. Her hair was always tied neatly at the back, her apron dusted in flour, and her eyes held a quiet, steady calm. Lena had lived alone since she was very young. Orphaned in an accident, she had been raised by an old baker, a quiet man who taught her how to bake, how to live with kindness, and then quietly passed away when she was only 18. No degrees, no family, no assets except for an old, dented oven. But Lena possessed something that everyone in town quietly acknowledged: a kind heart and a selfless soul. Each morning, before the sky even turned blue, she would rise to knead dough and bake the first batches of bread to bring to the nearby orphanage. Every Friday evening, while others packed up to rest, she would quietly hand out pastries to the homeless near the fish market. Some weeks, she barely made a profit, but to her, the smiles of those receiving her bread were reward enough. When news of the mayor's unusual search spread across town, someone said, "Lena should try. If kindness is the key, who else could match her?" But she only smiled softly. "I just know how to bake. I don't know anything about leading." Still, something stirred gently inside her. Not ambition, not desire for power, but a quiet, persistent question. If good people don't step forward, then who will do the right thing for this town? And so, after a sleepless night, Lena made a decision. She signed up. No expectations, no ilusions. She just wanted to try to see if the heart of a humble baker girl could still be heard in a world so crowded with noise, of titles and ambition. She tidied her shop, packed a few simple loaves, and set out on her way, unaware that this journey wouldn't just lead her to City Hall, but to a fateful moment where the future of a town would rest gently in the hands of one woman's quiet, unconditional goodness. The sky had yet to fully lighten when Lena locked the door to her bakery. The sea breeze tugged gently at her tousled hair, carrying the scent of salt and damp air. She wrapped herself in an old coat, slung a bag of bread over her shoulder, and brought along a few small items for the road. The town hall wasn't far, but for someone unaccustomed to journeys, each step felt like a quiet challenge. She walked down damp cobblestone streets, across a wooden bridge arching over a narrow canal. The houses lining her path were still asleep, their windows glowing faintly with soft yellow light. The town at dawn felt like a warm blanket just beginning to stir, peaceful, still, and completely unaware that something strange was waiting at the end of that road. Nearing the hilltop, where the path curled around a line of birch trees, Lena suddenly stopped. There, by the roadside, in the biting chill of early winter, sat an old woman. Her hair was wild, her shoulders hunched beneath a tattered shawl. Her hands trembled as she held an empty basket. She looked exhausted, eyes dull, body barely upright. "Miss, please, just something to eat," she whispered, her voice nearly swept away by the wind. Lena stood still. She looked at the bag in her hands, the warm, soft loaves she had baked that morning, intending to share with people at City Hall, to make connections, to leave a good impression. She glanced down at herself. She didn't have much either. Just that bag of bread. Just that coat. But without hesitation, as if guided by instinct rather than thought, Lena knelt down, opened her bag, and gave the woman every loaf she had. She then removed the only warm shawl she'd brought for herself and gently wrapped it around the woman's thin shoulders. "I don't have much, but please stay warm," Lena said softly, her voice calm and honest. The old woman looked up at her, and in her eyes was something deeper than gratitude, something raw and wordless, a kind of emotion that went far beyond a simple thank you. She only nodded, said nothing, and Lena didn't wait for more. She smiled gently, then rose and continued walking, now with nothing but a thin coat between her and the cold. She didn't know. That single pause, that quiet act of kindness, unseen by the world, was the real test life had quietly placed before her. A test with no score, no audience, but heavier than any interview and more powerful than any plan. When Lena arrived at the town hall, the sun had already passed its peak. The morning mist had lifted, and soft light streamed through pale clouds, casting a golden sheen over the old stone steps. The building stood tall in the center of the square, its red-tiled roof flecked with moss, its towering glass windows reflecting the gentle blue of the sky. There was something timeless about it, a quiet dignity, as though it were holding onto an old secret. Lena took a deep breath. Her shawl was gone. Her body was tired. All that remained in her hands was an empty cloth bag. Around her, the other candidates had already gathered, dressed sharply, confidently, holding gift boxes, files, even photographers trailing behind to capture their historic campaign. She fell out of place, like a child stumbling into a stage built for grown-ups. Then, a security guard stepped out, scanned a list, and gave a small nod. "Miss Lena, this way, please. The mayor's expecting you." The heavy doors creaked open, leading her into a vast, sunlit room. The furnishings were simple. Sunlight poured through tall windows, casting long shadows across an old mahogany desk. Behind that desk sat an elderly man, frail, his hair the color of ash, face weathered with time, but eyes calm and kind. He sat there as if he had been waiting for her all along. Lena bowed politely, her heart pounding in her chest. But then, as she looked up, her breath caught. That face. It was the face of the homeless woman from this morning. Those eyes, unmistakable. Now, there were no tangled curls, no tattered shawl. Now, he was the mayor, dignified, composed, serene. "You recognize me, don't you?" The old man smiled gently. Lena stammered, stunned. You were... But how? Why would you?" "Disguise myself," he said, finishing her thought, his eyes twinkling with something deeper. Because true kindness doesn't need a spotlight. It only shows itself when there's nothing to gain in return. I had to know, who among you would stop for someone with nothing to offer, even if it meant risking everything they came here for? He rose slowly and placed a hand on Lena's shoulder. And today, you show me the answer. The room fell silent. Outside, the wind shifted the clouds, and sunlight poured in more boldly. And in that moment, Lena understood. She hadn't just passed a test. She had surpassed her own doubt about whether goodness alone could ever be enough. Because sometimes it is the quietest acts of compassion that speak the loudest to the hearts of those searching for a true leader. On that press day, beneath the weight of curious stares and the flash of 100 cameras, the mayor rose to speak. "I have found my successor," he announced. A hush fell, then a ripple of murmurs. Eyes darted around the room, each person trying to guess. Was it the young man in the designer suit? The eloquent woman who delivered a fiery speech yesterday? Or perhaps someone quietly backed by long-standing officials? But then, the mayor turned to Lena. She was standing near the edge of the room, nearly invisible in her faded, threadbare clothes, still carrying the air of a baker, not a politician. "That young woman," he said, his voice steady, resonant, cutting through the noise, "gave away all her food to someone in need. She took off her only shawl on a freezing morning, not because anyone was watching, not for applause or reward, but because her heart simply couldn't turn away." Silence. A deep, complete silence filled the room. No whispers, no laughter, only eyes, widened at first in disbelief, then slowly softening into awe. Lena stepped forward, unsure, overwhelmed. She had never imagined she would be chosen, even less so that a quiet act on a lonely road could change the course of a future. The mayor continued, his tone calm, but full of unwavering conviction. "We don't need a leader who speaks the loudest in the room. We need one who can hear the softest cries of the forgotten. Not someone who stands above to bestow charity, but someone who dares to kneel down, to share, to live among the people." He took Lena's hand, lifted it high for all to see. "This is the person I trust to bring kindness back to our town." Applause erupted, loud, genuine, resounding. Heads nodded in agreement. Eyes began, for perhaps the first time, to look beyond appearances, to see worth not wrapped in wealth or words, but in the quiet weight of compassion. And Lena understood. She had not been chosen for a title. She had been chosen to do what was right. She had no power, no riches, no fiery speeches, but she held something no school could teach, no exam could score: empathy. And in the end, that was the most priceless gift of all, because kindness doesn't need recognition to have value. But if the world is lucky enough to recognize it, then that very world might begin to change. As time passed, the town began to change, not through grand speeches, not with flashy campaigns, but through small, honest acts. A nursing home built from villagers' donations, a marketplace that opened early for the working poor, winter nights lit by free soup kitchens, and coats left hanging on doorways for anyone who needed them. And behind it all was a girl who once wore a worn-out shawl, with no title, no power, but a heart that never turned away from another's pain. Lena. The townspeople began calling her by a humble but tender name, the leader who kneels, not because she was noble, but because she always slowed down to hear a sigh. She always looked up just in time to meet the eyes of the weary and smile. She didn't lead from inside a boardroom. She led from long walks through the market, from sitting on sidewalks, and asking how someone's day had really been. And strangely enough, that kind of kindness made the whole town stronger. Because when compassion is sown the right way, it doesn't make people weak. It brings them together. One day, a reporter asked her, "What made you the leader? Was it strategy, education, or just a lucky break?" Lena simply smiled. "It was a homeless woman," she said, "who reminded me that when we give without expecting anything in return, that's when our hearts touch something truly great." Then she added, softly but with certainty, Titles don't make us who we are, but compassion can. The world may celebrate success, but what it needs are those who are quietly kind, those who stop when others pass by, those who choose to love, even when no one is watching. Because in the end, we won't be remembered for what we had, but for what we gave. And that is how one unknown girl, armed only with quiet kindness, rewrote the destiny of an entire town. Lena was never born to be a leader. She didn't have an impressive background. She didn't attend prestigious schools. She knew no one in high places. The only thing she carried with her was a heart that never stopped aching when someone else was in pain. And it was that very heart that changed everything. You see, this world isn't shaped only by brilliant minds. It's also shaped by those who are brave enough to hold on to their kindness in an age where it's so easy to let it go. Maybe today, no one notices you. No one applauds. Maybe you're just the last to leave the office, the one quietly cleaning up a child's desk, the person sharing your meal with a stranger on the corner. You don't need anyone to see that, because just like Lena, sometimes it's the smallest, quietest acts that make someone truly worthy. You don't need to stand on a stage to change the world. You just need the strength not to turn away when a fragile hand reaches out in silence. You just need the courage not to be indifferent when everyone else is. Because maybe, just maybe, you don't know it yet, but in that one moment, when you chose compassion over apathy, you became the chosen one to someone who had lost hope, to someone who was hungry, to someone who just needed one spark of light. Lena's story isn't a fairy tale. It doesn't end in a castle or with a crown. Her story is a reminder. Kindness doesn't care if you're rich or poor, famous or forgotten. Kindness only asks for a heart that feels and a pair of hands willing to reach out. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change an entire world. So if today you feel small, like your voice doesn't matter, like you have no place, remember this. You don't need to be chosen by a king. You just need to choose what's right. And in that moment, you already are the chosen one. In the end, this story isn't just about a poor girl becoming a leader. It's not just about a town transformed by compassion. It's a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin from the simplest acts. In a world that's fast, cold, and fiercely competitive, maybe the bravest thing isn't climbing the highest, but knowing when to slow down and kneel. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to stand out. You don't need applause. You just need to love enough, to be patient enough, and to be brave enough to choose kindness, even when no one is watching. Because sometimes, a worn-out scarf, a piece of share bread, can be what rewrites a destiny. And if you're still wondering, can someone like me really make a difference? Then remember this. The world doesn't need a hero. It just needs someone like you, with enough kindness to begin.